Okay.
Okay, now we're gonna see if we can get going and welcome everybody. If I get to the presentation here, there we go. And we are zooming today into the Boy Scout camp and or the Great Swamp. And this is a pretty cool area in Block Island, kind of in the center of the island at the end of Connecticut Avenue, which dead ends at the end of the upper part of Connecticut Avenue, dead ends at the east end of the airport runway. And if you go off to the sort of the left of the road, it goes into an area land that's owned by the Boy Scouts. And here's not a great zoom, a great Google Earth picture, but this is generally the area I'm going to be sort of talking you through. It's mostly swampy. There's lots of ponds. It's kind of got some deep crevasses like hillsides, and you'll see some big rocks. It's known as the Great Swamp on Block Island. So any other community that has a great swamp, this is going to seem puny, but this swamp is our great swamp. And the Boy Scout camp, as I mentioned, is owned by the Boy Scouts of America, but the Nature Conservancy purchased the conservation easements over this several years ago, more than a decade, I believe, which is really great because it's a really interesting habitat. Even though it's sort of tucked in between quite a bit of, housing, club soda, the hotel bar right down the street, and the airport. But in this area, it's amazing. And there's 3 campsites for the Boy Scouts, and they are marked here as 3, 4, and 5. So you'll see when I show some of those slides with numbers, that's referring to these spots. And here we are at the end of Connecticut Avenue, and the chain link fence is the Airport Corporation. And we'll be going to the left down the road that peters out quite quickly into this area. A lot of these photos were taken over the last several weeks, so you'll notice quite a change in vegetation because it's been changing quickly. But this tall tree right at the entrance is a pear tree. And it is what I've discovered is a Bradford pear. And as I said a little earlier, it doesn't seem to bear fruit. I've been there many years. I've never found fruit. And when I've seen these in sidewalk settings, they don't seem to have fruit either. So I'm not sure if there need to be more or what the situation is there. But it was really beautiful a couple of weeks ago when it was blooming, big. And this particular day, I didn't put in the little video with the bees. The thing was buzzing with bees all around each one of these flowers. And they're beautiful flowers, like almost everything I'm always pointing out. When you look at them closely, they're really beautiful. And in this case, each individual flower, you'll notice a slight difference in color of the stamens. That's because these haven't yet opened up. This bud is still unfurling, and the stamens are curled in, and the little tops, the little knobs at the top, the anthers, haven't yet unfolded. So it looks like this little, I don't know, little gorgeous piece of sculpture. And then this one up here, it's opened up a little bit more, and this one's fully open, and it's lost that beautiful red color of the anthers. So just beautiful. And in a single, twig or branch, several flowers in various stages of opening and developing. So this, as I said, this tree was buzzing with bees. So as you go down that road, first thing you sort of come to, and the place is really just pockmarked with water, and it is slowly flowing. In this case, the pond is on, if you're walking down the road, the pond is on your right. And that's what you're seeing here on the left. And it's fairly still because it pools up here. And often you can see mallards. I did see mallards in here that particular day, night herons, things like that. But usually the pools back here are very slow moving. The clay must be very near the top, because this whole area is water is very near the surface. And because of the road, they've installed a culvert right here. It goes under the road and then deposits the water on the other side. And it was flowing so fast this particular day that there was actually forming a whirlpool as the water was flowing in. The water level, yesterday I was out there just double checking, it's a little bit lower, so you didn't see that phenomenon yesterday. So it's very difficult to take pictures in the Great Swamp because it is pretty much inaccessible. I fortunately have a friend who lives nearby on a second floor apartment. So I bugged her for a few days last week when trying to get the shad in its peak bloom. Is one of the most beautiful vistas for looking at the shad on Block Island, probably just because of its size and the fact that it's uninterrupted. But from this apartment, which is in one of the buildings next to the Neptune House, you can see all the way, this is the whole breadth of the Great Swamp. From sort of the more southeastern section, you're looking at Payne Farm up here, now owned by the Phalens, but the Payne family farm with that very distinctive, very tall elm tree. And then you look across, almost all shad, but we're going to be looking more closely in a minute at the rest. And then it continues down here. Obviously, I couldn't get it on one pass until it ends over here on the west with the the runway for the airport. So lots of dips and hills and different vegetation. So we're just going to look closely. I zoomed in on some spots. Boy, there's just nothing more beautiful than looking at the Payne Farm or the Phalen House homestead across the Great Swamp. And the water tower is the big black and white tower to the left, just to help you get your bearings. And there's a better view of it. I was looking at this earlier. This is a pretty distinctive tree. It's probably one of the tallest trees on Block Island. It used to be two of these, and one of them came down. I can't quite remember when it was, actually. I thought I would always know, but of course now I don't. And I think there's a horse or a goat or something right there. I don't know where that came from. Anyway, the texture, you always hear me talking about the texture of the landscape is just phenomenal. So if you're starting from my vantage point, overlooking the Great Swamp, basically looking south and start on the east, there's this swamp that's really predominated by Phragmites, although there is quite a bit of in the edge that's going to the west, there's quite a bit of cattails. And then as you go along, you come to this in this time of year where things are at various stages of blooming, not blooming, and leafing out. You can see all these different colors, and it helps to identify what's actually there without actually being able to be there, which I will not be able to do until it freezes over someday soon. Not soon, but someday. So this is a big stand of oaks. There's a lot of oaks. It's one of the few areas on the island where there are oaks that are not planted. Although there are more and more as you look, the acorns are coming from somewhere. And then just to the west of that, you go a little farther and you see this other, this is sort of a continuation. On the east side of this was the Phragmites we saw before. And on this side is this wonderful, intriguing looking bog-like area, which is an area there is very leveled off. It's like a plain. But I can tell from the colors that that's going to be a lot of sphagnum and other really terrific bog plants. I would love to get in there somehow in the summer and see if there are any bog specialties, specializing plants in there, like sundews or something like that. That would be cool. And there's a close-up of the oak trees a little bit more. The thing not only can you tell they're oak by the fact that they're not yet leafing out at the time of this photo, which again was about a week ago, but the form of an oak, and I'll be talking about this in a few other slides, that branches tend to be much more, although these aren't horizontal, they sort of come out from the sides and in sort of more straight like ways. And after a while, you get to know a lot of trees just by their form, let alone their leaves and bark and everything else. And then, of course, again, I zoomed in pretty tight to try to get a sense of what the bog-like bottom is looking like. So intriguing, if nothing else. I think I titled this An Introduction to the Great Swamp in the Boy Scout Camp, because I got so interested in this that I really got to figure out how to get back there and do some more detailed work in the different little mini ecosystems, because I think it's going to be fascinating. Just need another life, I think. I need a clone. And keep going to the west, and throughout you can just see there's shad after shad. It's really almost peak at the time of this photo. Unfortunately, the light wasn't as great as I would like it, but hey, you got to do what you got to do. And you see again the texture and the color changing, and then again the runway up here. So we've just sort of done that whole panorama a little bit more focused. One thing you notice in there's a lot of red sort of mixed in, just coming in. So I could tell that amongst the shad, which is all the white, and the shad blooms different trees at different times, over the course of the 2 weeks. So you can have some early and some late, so that some are already leafing out after their blossom. Some are where they're really white like this, or just at their peak blossom. And then there's this red, and these are red maples, I'm pretty sure. And I'll show you later why I think that. But again, nice white, bright one, shad right there that's really showing its perfect colors. We're well past peak bloom, peak shad now, and we're on to other things on the island. We're in the fast and furious of blossoming of shrubs and plants on the island. But again, I am often saying I just love the color and the texture that you can see in this landscape. Again, you've got the green of probably the multiflora rose coming in, red maples splotching in, white, and then this this is leafing out black cherry, which is just about almost all the shad on the island right now the blossoms are past, they're dropping. If it blows, next time if it gets a little windy, we're going to have a snowstorm of shad petals. But the black cherries are starting to come on, and they're sort of giving everything on the island right now this sort of gold look, where there's a little red in the green of the unfurling leaves. And I was thinking last year that it seems like the shad isn't as powerful a view as it used to be. And I think a lot of it is that the black cherries have gotten to be so big and so prolific in a way that they weren't, 10, 15, 20 years ago, that they are now competing with the visual of that great shad blow that we all used to look for and still do. And it's still great, but it gets overtaken very quickly by this sort of yellowish green of the leafing out black cherries. And again, if you're on the island, that's what you're going to be seeing mostly today. So back to the road, heading down towards the Boy Scout camp sites themselves. And I should say, this is not a walk it's certainly not arduous, because you can't go very far, but it is not open strictly to the public. I don't lead walks here. In the off-season, it's used a lot by the Boy Scouts from spring through late fall. As soon as we get over COVID year, didn't get much use last year because, of course, Boy Scouts weren't having their camping adventures. And this is for Boy Scout troops on the mainland sign up and reserve these sites. There's 3 main sites way in advance. It's very competitive. And on Block Island, we know the Boy Scouts are coming because it means it's going to be raining. And since it hasn't been raining all the last 3 weeks, I guess no Boy Scouts. But there is a chain there to try to keep people from driving in, and to, keep. And there's nothing wrong with going there for a nice walk. There is something wrong with going there to use the campfires that are in the sites and party all night. So it's sort of a hard balance that we're constantly trying to maintain on Block Island. The use, overuse, or use abuse issue in all of our public lands can be a trial. But if you happen to be here, you could take a stroll down here, but if it's in the season, you might run into a lot of Boy Scouts. But if you did walk down this road, you'd come to this fork in the road, and this is where the road ends, and it goes off to these 3 campsites. This one to the left here, one to the sort of center, a little bit leftish, and then one to the right. But along the road there, you'll see a lot of this right now. This is high bush blueberry, again, giving a lot of red tinge. It's kind of a different type of red than the red maples, at a different elevation, very near the ground. And the high bush blueberry is blossoming right now. These beautiful cone, little bell-shaped, urn-shaped flowers. And it has a very distinctive bark. It's kind of, it looks a little stripy, a lot of red. A lot of times it's very crooked looking, but this is very typical. And this is a typical setting. The high bush blueberries like to have their feet wet. They can be right in the water or not too far from it. And there's a great variety between the pink flowers that you're seeing on the left and the white flowers that you're seeing on the right. These are different types, and variations, but if you could probably key them out to slightly different subspecies perhaps, but they're the vaccinium, which is the high bush blueberries. And as I said, everywhere on Block Island right now, if it's around wetlands. And they like wetlands that don't move. That you're not going to find them at a stream necessarily. You're going to find them where water is pooling around a pond or in a swampy, wet meadow, very wet meadow. The other thing you'll see along the road is a lot of these. These are the leftover seed pods from sweet pepper bush. This is another plant that likes its feet wet, grows along the side of ponds on the island. Won't bloom until August, but right now it's starting to leaf out, and these are its brand new, fresh, perfectly getting ready sweet pepper bush. And if you're familiar with this at all, this plant, it has the most beautiful scent. When you're walking by it, instantly, and it's a beautiful white flower. Again, like I said, early August, it will start blooming. But right now, it lines both sides of the road because there's water and sitting water on both sides of the road. And that's what it likes. Also seen on the road as I went down, some black knot, which is on the left. That's that fungus growing around that tree. And also hopping ahead of me on the road is a gray catbird. So all kinds of bird life in here, especially things that like water or berries or insects. I guess I should say, probably everybody's would be familiar with this. This sitting water, it's a swamp, and it is prone to mosquitoes. And even yesterday, I had quite a few midges and gnats and little tiny no-see-ums buzzing around. But that's great for the birds, especially the warblers that are coming through the island right now. And again, along the edge of the pond, also lots of red maples. And again, I've talked a lot about red maples over the course of the year. There's a lot of variety from what I call the swamp maple, which has a big open sort of wide form, and then some of the other red maple forms that are little bit more upright, and they all have different times and ways of setting their fruit. But I looked at these, and this is what you can see across the swamp. What are these trees with these heavy red? They're not flowers at the top of the trees, and they're all throughout the Great Swamp and the Boy Scout. And here you can see them along the road. And as you get closer, what you're seeing is those red are the setting of the seed. They're winged seed of red maples. And again, when you look at something closely enough, you see the beauty of it. And they are all just ripening now, and soon they'll be helicoptering down and ready to set those seeds somewhere in hopes of a new plant, or feed a bird, or a Block Island meadow vole, or something else. Maples, I just threw these in as a comparison. This maple on the left, the big tree, that's a different form. That's the one that I call the swamp maple. They're all the same genus, just sometimes a little different species, and depending where they, excuse me, where they grow. But with this big open form is what I call the swamp maple, and they are not setting the heavy red winged fruit just yet. So these are a little bit behind, but again, this big form, but the leaves are definitely starting to unfurl. And the thing about the red maple is they're red, every part of them, of their life cycle is red at some point. We saw earlier this spring the flowers, which are what these are up here, beautiful red. And then we just saw the seeds red, and here are the very early leaves. They're just unfurling. They're incredibly supple, and you can see very strongly that red tinge to them before they will lose that, turn green for the summer, and then go back to the brilliant reds and oranges of the maples in the fall. So the first campsite we come to is marked by the sign. You can tell the Boy Scouts haven't been here for a while because they're going to have to cut the vegetation back away from that sign, but it's Camp Niantic. And these go to just little clearings where there's a stone fire pit, and then off of the little clearings there, and a picnic bench, there are like little pockets where the kids can set their tents up. So a troop, depending on the size of the troop, each of the campsites are, I would say they're small, medium, and large. So you could have a small troop taking Camp Niantic, and a larger one could take one of the other campsites. You know, it's not like a campsite means you get a fire pit made of bricks and rocks, and you get a picnic table. And at the beginning of the road, which I neglected to put in my presentation, the two porta-johns down there, so they're not quite as scenic. But you can see even in this, here are some of the more white high bush blueberry flowers right here, sort of covering up the Camp Niantic sign. But once you get up to the campsite, once you go, there's just a little path that goes right to this beautiful pond, another one of these small still ponds completely surrounded. These are definitely what you would call a kettle hole, circular little depression, clay in the bottom so that it's holding water. I've never seen these ponds dry up. There's water in them all the time. Wonderful sort of mats of sphagnum moss going down. And here you can see that distinctive bark and trunk form, color, shape of the high bush blueberry. There's another look of it. And very still water the day I was there. Again, you'd be surprised what kind of birds you can scare up off of the water. One of the things that migrating birds want when they come to Block Island is access to water. So these little ponds and pools are terrific places to do birding, because birds want to drink. As I think I'll have a sip myself. Excuse me. But you'll see a lot of this almost impenetrable. And at first glance, you don't know if it's multiflora rose or greenbrier, and but it's hard to get through. In this case, it's mostly the multiflora rose, which is just starting to leaf out now. And usually at the end of June, third week of June, multiflora rose is beautiful for 10 days. It sort of covers the island, these great mats of white little roses, multiflora rose, and the island air is delicious. It just smells wonderful because there's so much multiflora rose. And also that time of year, there's a lot of moisture in the air. It's often foggy, and that tends to capture those scents. And but it's only for about 10 days. And then those beautiful mats of sweet smelling white flowers go back to being an invasive vine that is impenetrable, and you spend the rest of the year fighting it back. And there's a lot of barberry, which is another invasive plant that's making its way in, even in the Great Swamp. Predominant right now, or ending right now, is the shad bush. And it is this particular day that I took this photo. It's kind of dark, but I kind of like the form that it gave. But it really was, this is it at full bloom. I think this photo was actually taken on Friday or Saturday. So very recently. And these are mostly off now, but for a while, the shad was just spectacular. It was a really great shad week this past week. Then we go to our next campsite, Mohawk. And this one also needs a little work because there's a dead shad across the path, but fortunately it's hung up in the tree, so it was enough clearance for me to easily get under it and go up the path and come across really interesting, different. I go, now what is that on the right here? It looks like a high bush blueberry, but I looked it up, and it's a huckleberry, and the huckleberries and the blueberries are very closely related, same family, different genus, but same form, but very different looking flowers. And I'll be interested to go back in a day or two and see how these have progressed, but quite nice. I hadn't really noticed, appreciated the huckleberries in there before. So that was, I always love that I keep finding and learning new things on these walks. So thank you all. The other thing I found on this same path was Moro honeysuckle. We're used to seeing the Japanese honeysuckle around the island. There's some of this. It's a different kind of flower. It's similar. It's very similar. It's a big invasive vine crawling over everything. But the flowers are white, and they're blooming now, whereas the regular Japanese honeysuckle is not yet blooming, other than here and there. This is pretty strongly coming into bloom, will pop, I would say, by the middle to the end of this week. And what's interesting, if you look at the form of these flowers, they're paired. So there's one stalk and then the pair of blossoms. And actually, you can see really well on this one, the berries on this Moro honeysuckle, when it produces berries, are joined. They're like twinned, like a Siamese twin. And you can see why. This is really the one fruit. It's the ovary for the plant is right here. And it's going to be two, and they're already attached. So this will be the part that grows into the berry. So when you find that dark blue berry that looks like it's stuck together, that's the Moro honeysuckle, a little bit different. Unfortunately, it is also an invasive, but because we don't see as much of it, it has more appeal to me than the Japanese honeysuckle. And again, just look at those leaves and the form and the texture. It's hard to go for a walk with me because I'm always stopping and looking at things. So once you get to the top of right off, I'm pretty much, for this photo in the center, I'm standing right next to where the fire pit is. And these little knobs are all very sandy. These are typical glacial morainal knobs. It's sort of interesting because the knobs, where each one of these campsites is on like a little tiny hill. But when you go down, you're into water and swamp and, typical swamp-like vegetation. But this is clearly an oak. And again, I'm always focusing on the form. These are all the same tree, right? So this is from a distance, trying to illustrate that a lot of these branches come off almost horizontally, which is very typical for the oak forms. So, and then here is the very fresh. These leaves are just uncurling now. You can see that this tree really isn't fully leafed out just yet. And I thought that was a nice size tree, but I saw a bigger one later. But in the same site, this is black cherry, already leafed out. This is much farther along than most of the black cherry on the island. I will say that these sites are also very protected. I mean, it's basically in the center of the island. It's relatively low, and then they're all these campsites are surrounded by pretty tall brush. So it does make for a really nice winter walk, especially if the wind is blowing, because you can get out of the wind and find some interesting little habitats to be bird watching, which is often what I'm doing when I'm going for a walk. But you can see these have already set their fruit. They're not ripe yet. I mean, they're flower buds. Sorry, the fruit's not ready yet, but these are the flower buds. These will be sort of a long thumb of many white flowers, but these are about a week, I would say, ahead of the rest of them on Block Island, which was interesting. And if you go around the corner in this same campsite, there's a birch tree, right, which is on the right. And here it is looking at it from the other direction. This is one of the larger birch trees around the island. Actually, there's a lot about this size, I would say. Not a lot, but the birch trees that you notice are about this size. And many of them have been planted. And I think that's kind of the key point here, that most of these trees, the birch and the oak, I didn't actually get any pictures of beech trees because they weren't even close to leafing out yet. And tupelos, which I'll show you in a few moments. These are all, they're all stock that was here. They can tell from the pollen core samples that have done on Block Island that these are species that were here when the first European settlers came. This was part of these species were part of what was the forest structure before the European settlers in the 1661 on Block Island. This is one of the only areas that was not heavily farmed. It surely was dredged for peat in the bog, but so a lot of these trees in this area are presumed to be from native seed stock. So those oaks were probably started from oaks that were here, a couple of centuries ago. Whereas most of the oaks on the island, many of the birches on the island, not all, but many, were planted around the homestead and the farms and the laneways by humans. These seem to be the native stock. And that's one of the things that makes this area so interesting, is that everything is there, happened there. It wasn't planted by settlers. And since so much of what is around the edges of the Great Swamp are trees, that's pretty interesting. So back down and take the last fork to Camp Minnewaska. And I probably butchered that, but I did the best I could. And when you go through this little campsite, which is a little bit bigger, there's a much bigger area around the fire pit. And the fire pit was even warm, imagine that. But then there's a path that goes off of this, kind of a hidden path that goes off of this campsite. But looming above everything is this very large oak tree. And again, the not quite, but very horizontal tending branch off the side, giving that regular distinctive oak look, and lots of very large old oak trees all around this area from a previous year, obviously last year. Most of them are pretty decayed, but this one happened to be lying there just perfectly, ready to have its photograph taken. So if you go out of this campsite and through the little path, you start to go into a landscape that's kind of corduroy. In other words, it's kind of, you go up a little ridge and then you go down a ravine and you might hit a trickle of water, and then you go up a little ridge and you go down a ravine where there's a little bit more water. So it's really interesting. These are tupelo or black gum, and this is definitely one of the predominant tree species that was here at the time of colonization on Block Island. And these have been all the pollen cores that have been done show that tupelo was one of the primary species for a good 500 years, even before the European colonists came to Block Island. So this is a really interesting area. It's going to look a lot more interesting, I think, in 10 days when it's all leafed out. These are just barely starting to leaf out. There's a lot of sunlight there, which was nice, but there was one of the largest erratic boulders I've ever seen just past those that little bunch of tupelos, and it was a very large erratic boulder. And just to give you a little scale, there it is in scale. And you can sort of just make out there's water down here. So we're sort of at one of those ridges. And now in a few moments, we're going to go down this hillside into the edge of the water. But this is one big boulder. And here it is with people on it, just to give you a little scale again. That was impressive. Again, you can see a lot of water over here as well. And here we've gone down to the little ravine. We've gone down the little ravine. It's not really the right word because it's not that dramatic, but it's dramatic by Block Island scale. And everything is just starting for swamp life. The sphagnum over here, there's ferns starting, sphagnum on the ground here. I'm actually not sure if these were, after I looked at this photo, I thought, are these just leaves on the ground? Or are they something else growing there? So I need to go back and check that out. But again, right away, here's another big tangle of high bush blueberry with that sort of straight aspect, a little bit reddish, crooked like, with its feet wet in the swamp. So wonderful area, especially if it's cool so the bugs aren't out. And there's a close-up of the fern that's growing there, just starting to unfold. And here's, we had both did attempt to identify this one, and it's sensitive fern. And thanks to one of our viewers today, who I met, who's a fern specialist, and can't wait to do some fern walking with her on Block Island and get ready for next year's programs. And I believe that these are the spore leftover structures that produce the spores for the sensitive fern. But perhaps at the end, if anybody wants to enlighten us a little bit more, that would be great. And they're just opposite sides of the same one. Again, beautiful. Look at that structure. It's just amazing. Probably get tired of me saying that, but I just can't get over it. And then these are some unidentified beautiful fern species that are growing there. And once you start looking at them, you notice different patterns of development. And later in the season, a lot of these develop their spore patterns on the underside of these. And I believe that a lot of the identification is done by those. So I'm looking forward. As I said a lot last year, I'm still saying, looking forward to learning a lot more about ferns in my future. Now, this you might not notice right away what it's a photo of. This is the first of the ravine. We actually already, I kind of jumped around a little bit. The earlier picture was a little wider water, and we've come back to this area. And what I'm pointing out here is this. This is a rolled up white sheet for attracting moths with a light at night. So a lot of work has been done with the moth species, identifying the moth species in on Block Island in general, but in the Tupelo forest here in the Great Swamp. And this is furled up like a sail, so it can't be catching. But if it's being used, this unfurls and drops to the ground, and there'll be a light, and then the moths will go to the white cloth, and then you can take pictures of them. So there's a couple of guys. It's a very wonderful story. Aaron Hunt produced these presentation slides and is letting me use them for this. Don't worry, I'm not going to get too mothy on you, but he is a graduate student at the University of Delaware. He's been collecting insects, bugs, moths, and beetles on Block Island since he was about, well, a young man, a young boy, probably 15 or younger, actually. And he has made the acquaintance and friendship of a retired professor here on Block Island as well, Nigel Grindley, and they have become the fantastic duo of moths of Block Island. They've identified more moth species on Block Island than have been identified in all of Rhode Island. And what they have taught me is that a lot of moths are particular or very specific to a small range of host plants, either for the moth itself or for its larvae, its caterpillar. And so where you find a moth is very much determined by what it eats and what its larvae eat. And there are specialists on the Tupelo. And that's what this presentation slide that Aaron put together for one of his graduate classes is about. And I don't have anywhere near the expertise that he does, but I'm going to show you some beautiful moths. These are the ones that are the Tupelo specialists. And he's showing here that these species, this is how many he found of this species, which is keyed in the other slide, in the Tupelo forest, this one at the Boy Scout camp, versus other places on Block Island. He does do a lot at his own home, which is Corneck Road. And he and Nigel are for years now, at least 5 years, been doing different areas around the island, surveying the moths of Block Island. And these are not found, almost with one exception, these moths are only found around these Tupelos in the Boy Scout camp. And that's one of the great things about these preserves that seem to be, oh, it's just a swampland. Well, it's an amazing ecosystem. And because they've been pretty much left alone, you can find some interesting things. And we have great access to. Here we have somebody retired from his career, a scientist, and a young scientist just starting his career. And Nigel and I were both saying, too bad we won't be around in 30 years to find out what Aaron has done, because it will be terrific. But here are some of the moths that are the specialists, and the names are great. There's a great effort with moths to give them common names that make them more interesting and accessible, quote unquote, to the layman. But this is a Cadbury's lichen moth, and it looks like a lichen. This is a Tupelo leaf miner. Some of these are so specific, they're named by the vegetation. This is called the Hebrew, and this is the Tupelo leaf folder. And these photos are all by Nigel. And lest you get the wrong idea, these moths are less than an inch, most of them a half an inch. This is a good camera, a fast lens, and some good light, and a lot of patience. And here's some others that are also found in this area, but not exclusively. But I was out with Nigel last week, and we saw all three of the, he took these pictures this week, and they're beautiful. What a privilege it was to be with him and seeing these moths at the time, and then to see them now in this way in their photographs. But the false underwing, of course, I'm going left to right, top to bottom. Norman's Quaker, common loper, and appentesis. I can't say it, I'm sorry. This one doesn't have a common name, or at least Nigel didn't have it to give to me. But those patterns, they do the patterns in the landscape justice, I think. They're just beautiful. And then these are also equally beautiful and well named. On the left, olive and black carpet, sweet fern geometer. It depends on where you're from, how you pronounce that, I think. And the flame-shouldered dart, which we saw several of these the other night. And again, what a beautiful moth. So thank you, Nigel, and thank you, Erin, for your work on Block Island. I know you're not out there, but maybe you'll see this one day. And then also other things on the moth net show up. This is there were a lot of bicolored wood grains out last week at the site and this happens to be a mating pair, and they're just sort of stuck there butt to butt on the cloth for the whole time we were there. We finally had to shake them off because we were having to leave. But also on the net, a spring peeper. And Nigel's photo is much crisper, but I like the photo of the stretching spring peeper, so I put them both in there. But it sat there for quite a long time, and what a great opportunity to see their feet, their toes, and again, and the cross pattern on the spring peeper, which is very distinctive, and it is part of its scientific name, refers to the crucifer or cross pattern. And this is something else we saw when we were in the daytime getting ready to set up the nets. We were suddenly alerted to a red-tailed hawk, which was really acting aggressive. And this photo is not great because it's taken over quite a distance, but it's clearly a red-tailed hawk, not a common bird on Block Island. And we looked everywhere for its nest and said, well, it's acting like it has a nest. I don't see another mate. We didn't see a nest. We looked at the top of the trees, which is where it would be. And so finally I said, look, we really got to get out of here. He's too upset about something, so we should move on. We turned around, about 50 feet behind us was this nest up in the tree. Now, we didn't see any evidence of another bird. I don't know if he's made this or she's made this, we don't know, but there's a possibility of a nesting red-tailed hawk on Block Island. And if that would be something very new to Block Island, because it's been something like 400 years since there were trees tall enough to support a red-tailed hawk. So again, the Boy Scout camp might be just the place for it. And as we left Camp Minnewaska, I looked off the side, and in this tangle was this beautiful wild apple. And those are also blooming all over the island right now. And they can be beautiful white or very pink. This happened to be a really beautiful pink one. So we'll see. The apples are blooming quite nicely, and it's been nice and warm this week, which means I've seen a lot of bees. So hopefully that means good pollination and good apples in the fall. It'll all depend on the rain. But the spring flowering and the spring bees are doing their part. And that's kind of it. We'll go into other things seen this week. or this week, yes. I usually mix up my species, but I could not resist. This is peak spring migration. So here are some highlights of the spring banding, some beautiful birds. Indigo bunting, a male. Sometimes you get the female and it's not blue, it's sort of brown. But the blue on this was stunning, right from the wing, its back, everything. I couldn't stop looking at it, as you can tell. And thank you, Kurt Milton, for taking these photos. And then we had two beautiful warblers, both males, so there happened to be the plumage that is gorgeous, Blackburnian and bay-breasted warbler. Not a bird I see every year, and not a bird I see every year in the spring, which is when they are stunning. And a summer tanager also, usually you see the scarlet tanager. The summer tanager doesn't have the black wings, and this is a male changing from its sort of green yellow immature plumage to its full-on red plumage. So it's got a lot of variety in its coloration. And this is a female red-winged blackbird, and they are beautiful. We get taken in by the flashiness of the red-winged male, but the female is equally gorgeous in such a different way. And stay tuned. Coming up next on June 9th will be a program on Project Limulus, which is a community science program that tags horseshoe crabs. And you'll be learning everything about this animal that has been on this earth in some very similar form for over 300 million years. Coming up. And as always, I end with a little mini bird checklist of things I saw when I was in the Great Swamp in the Boy Scout camp, including the red-tailed hawk. And I just wanted to draw your attention to a piece of research that was done. Oh my God, I forgot to look. I think it's 1998. It says the forest history and restoration of Clayhead Block Island, but the first section, volume 1, is about the biophysical inventory of pre-settlement forest cover and land use history of Block Island. And that goes for the whole of the island. So it's a really great resource for understanding the vegetation development. It's focused on, especially on trees and what trees were here when starting from the first point of ice retreating from the landscape. So just threw that in as a terrific resource if you want to know more about some of the things I've been speaking about. And with that, again, I'm back to my beautiful textures of the landscape. Won't see this view again for another year. And I thank you for listening. And if you have questions or comments or corrections or clarifications, happy to have them.
Thanks, Kim. People can unmute themselves. Let me see. There was a thing in the chat. Well, Emily clarified when you had the two different fern photos. Yep. Marsh fern on the left and lady fern on the right. Oh, and Josie's wondering, what was the size of that peeper?
A peeper is about an inch to 1.25 inches.
Yeah, the whole, wow.
Well, when it was stretched out, it was about 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. Usually you don't see that one leg so stretched out, but yeah. So
great. That was fascinating, but the red-tailed hawk. I don't know if anyone has any questions. You can unmute yourselves or put it in the chat. Wait,
I was giving a thumbs up to Emily's comment.
Okay, all right, great. So then also, I'm sorry, I'm missing the chat here. So Josie said the largest oak with leaf on ground, red? Was it a red oak?
I don't know my oaks well enough, and I will have to look that one up. I don't know if it would be red or white is what we usually think of, but it's so sharp, that leaf. So I'll have to look that one up.
Okay.
I'm writing that down though, so I can let people know.
Nature Conservancy logo. What do you mean? Oh,
Oh, yeah.
sorry. Sorry. I was like, what?
The
Oh,
oak
yes. The oak leaf. Of course. Thanks, Josie. And Emily also put in a little bit more about the fern. Emily, if you want to talk a little about ferns, people might be interested to hear, but the one on the right could also possibly be an intermediate fern. Hard to tell without the sporing. Oh, she
Charlotte,
can't unmute yourself. Oh, I'm sorry. What's going on? Let me see if I can help. Let me get to my participants list.
oh yeah, you've
Um,
got everybody muted. Huh, that's
Oh, I
funny.
thought I was making it so people could unmute themselves, but I'm not. Hold on, let me try. Ask to unmute. So
There she
Yeah.
goes.
there you go,
Yeah.
Emily.
Yeah, so that one that was on the right in that picture that was sort of very frilly and very divided could either be the lady fern or the a small intermediate fern, like a very young one. And when ferns are notoriously hard to tell apart, especially when they're small and haven't reached full maturity yet. So that one probably could be either of those two. But if you find it again when it's mature and you flip it over and see what the spore producing structures are looking like, they would be very, very different between those two species.
Cool.
So in the lady fern, the sori are sort of long and hook shaped. And then in the intermediate fern, they would be very circular or sort of like a little like kidney shaped, but very much more rounded. So
Cool.
if you can find it again when it's producing spores, or maybe later this summer, we can go take a look at it and see which of those two it is.
That'd be
and
great.
the sensitive fern that you showed earlier, that one's neat because it's truly dimorphic. And so it has completely separate fertile and sterile leaves, which is what you showed, those like, yeah, the ones with those little hard little round enclosures or the spore producing little capsules on that one. So yeah, that's a beautiful plant.
Yeah, there seemed to be quite a bit of that down there. So
Yeah, perfect habitat for it.
yeah, we'll go there.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone else, I'm sorry if you can't unmute, if you're trying. You can always raise your hand too. But that was great. Oh,
Thank you. Thank you both. Just want to thank you. Good morning, everybody.
thanks,
Hi,
Nancy. Well, Kim, I'm really curious about the red-tailed hawk. So hopefully,
Yeah,
love to get an update on that. If we think
Yeah.
that's what's happening.
yeah, we'll just have to keep the hoodlums out of there.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Kim. Gotta
Thanks,
go.
Jackie.
This was
Thank you.
just beautiful, beautiful.
Well, thanks for joining.
It's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
All
See you
right,
soon,
bye.
Trudy. I hope you're gonna make it soon. You too, Sam and Polly.
Bye.
All
Thank
righty,
you.
bye. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks
Yeah.
a lot.
Okay, Kim. We'll
Okay.
catch you with the horseshoe crabs.
Okay.
All
See you later.
right, take
Talk
care,
to-
everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks.